Welcome back to my garden. This is video number 2 in the Building the Foundations of a Successful Garden series with Proven Winners. Proven Winners monthly newsletter, Winner's Circle, has decided to come out with 5 months of educational monthly focuses that we can learn about as gardeners during our downtime. We're not doing much in the garden. There's not much planting going on. Things have kind of gotten a little quiet. So we're taking this downtime and we're really focusing on education and learning how to build up the foundation for a successful garden. So next year when we go out and we get all our beautiful plants and we plant them in the garden, everything is ready to go to support those plants and to allow you or me to have the most successful garden we can next year. So in November, we focused on soil, understanding your soil, how to improve your soil, maintaining your soil health, and more. So make sure you check out that video if you missed it last month in November. It is in the Building the Foundations of a Successful Garden playlist. This month, we are going to be focusing on water. So water, plants are 90% water. So just like soil, this is a very important topic. And if we don't get our watering correct for plants, we're not going to have as a successful garden as we possibly could have, just because plants rely on water so heavily, and we can kind of mess it up either way. We can overwater them or we can underwater them. So understanding the amount of water that a plant needs, understanding how to water them, understanding how to conserve the water so that you're not wasting a whole bunch of water. All of these things are really important to having a successful garden. So tip number 1 for watering your garden properly is understanding the water needs of your garden or of a specific plant. So you need to know how much water a specific plant needs so you can know how much to water it or how often to turn on your drip irrigation system. Because it's really easy to overwater or to underwater a plant, and it's probably the thing that gets us gardeners the most is watering questions. Is this plant thirsty, or is something else wrong with it, right? So understanding the water needs of your plant is really, really important. Now, Proven Winners makes it easy. You can either look at the tag, right? If they have it written on the tag, or you can go to the Proven Winners website and look up your plant. And down in the description, it will say water category. And then Proven Winners will tell us which water category they've put this plant in. They have average water, they have low water, they have consistent water, and then they have wet. So let's talk about which each one of these things mean. So let's start with the kind of middle of the road category, and that is average. So I would say average, or sometimes you'll see it written as regular. And what this means is you want the watering to be pretty consistent and you want to be pretty consistently moist, but you do want to allow that plant to dry out. So basically, if it's in a pot and you were to touch the top of the soil, you would want it to feel dry before you watered it again. And so this is what we kind of think of as average watering. And depending on where you live, it's kind of hard to say exactly how often you're going to need to water, because some of us live in very hot climates and then the water's going to evaporate really quickly. Some of us live in very humid climates, but basically you want to check the plant every 2 to 3 days. And then once you've checked it and you can kind of get a feel for how often you need to water with allowing it to dry out a little bit on top, then you can understand how often you need to water or turn on your drip irrigation system. So the average watering plant is pretty easy. There are also a lot of plants that are categorized as average water needs. And the reason why they're categorized as average water needs is that they can withstand more wet feet, more wet soil, but they can also withstand more dry conditions. And these are the best plants to have, because if you ever mess up, if you ever miss a watering day, or if it rains unexpectedly right after you water, the plant's gonna be fine. The plant can handle a wide range of water conditions, and these are my favorite plants. Next category we're gonna talk about is the consistent water category, or sometimes it's written as consistently moist. And that is exactly what it means. These plants like to have the soil around their root system consistently moist. There always is a level of moisture in that soil so that nothing ever dries out. So as opposed to the average water needs plants, where you would touch the soil soil and it's okay if it feels dry on the top of the soil. These plants, that's not okay. That's kind of past the point of time, and you want to make sure that you water it right away. Now, consistently moist does not mean wet. Wet is the next category, and wet means like dripping wet, like the plant likes to be in moisture. Sometimes these are also called bog plants. These are plants that in nature, we would find them in kind of low-lying, really wet areas, maybe swampy areas that always have a pretty large amount of water in the soil. So these plants are going to need a lot of watering. These plants also, something to think about, if you have a lawn and you water that lawn a lot with overhead sprinklers, sometimes the overhead sprinklers tend to go over into garden beds. And a lot of plants can't handle that consistent amount of water. Lawns need water, especially during the summer months, almost every single day. So sometimes we can't plant plants in the area where there's overspray on lawns, but a wet plant, a wet water need plant, or a bog plant can handle that amount of water. So even if you live in a dry area like I do, sometimes there are certain areas in your garden, specifically on the edge of a lawn, that a wet plant might thrive. Now we're going to go all the way to the other end of the spectrum for water category, and we're going to talk about low water needs plants, or otherwise known as drought tolerant plants. So drought tolerant plants or low water need plants are often due to adaptations in that plant's physical nature, physical character, that makes them low water needs or drought tolerant. And these plants have developed this over years of being in dry, arid climates, kind of like where I live in Northern California. Sometimes there's really waxy leaves that don't evaporate the water from inside the plant very often. Sometimes they have really thick stems that can hold a lot of moisture in those stems. And most of them have very expansive root systems that allow them to pull up the water from the surrounding soil very easily. So these plants, once they're established, you really only have to water them about once or twice a month, depending on how much rainfall you get. For me, for drought tolerant plants, I tend to water about once a week in the hot summer, but we easily get in triple digits for weeks on end. So you kind of just have to play with it, but you have to know these plants like to dry out, they need to dry out, and they don't need as much water as the average plant, as you would think. It's actually pretty crazy how little water they do need. Now, take this with a grain of salt, or should I say, don't forget the fact that these plants, when they are in cans or when they're in pots, they normally have that expansive root system to take up that extra water. But when their root system is constrained to the pot, there's nowhere for those roots to go, and they can't take up as much water as they could as if they were planted in the ground. So if you have a plant, say for instance, a lavender, if it's planted in the ground, it has a very expansive, very shallow, but very, very expansive root system that can pull up the water that it needs. That's why a lavender is a low water needs plant, a drought tolerant plant, and you can actually very easily kill a lavender by watering it too much. I know, I've done it many, many times. But if you have a lavender that is actually in a pot, those lavender roots have not expanded out, and that lavender suddenly needs more water than you might think because the roots don't have the opportunity to take up the moisture that it needs. So just kind of have that in the back of your mind. If you buy a plant from the garden center and it says drought tolerant or it says low water need plant, just know that you're still going to have to water that plant when it's in the pot. And even when you get it into the ground, you're going to have to water that plant more than you think until its root system can expand out. And then it can become a low water needs plant or a drought tolerant plant. And like I said, you can water it once or twice a month. For me, maybe, once a week or once every other week. Tip number 2 for watering your garden properly is understanding the importance of watering deeply and infrequently. Now, this is so very important for watering, and that is because it is going to protect your plants in the long run. So imagine that you have a plant and imagine that you kind of sprinkle it with water from a watering can every single day. You kind of just water it every single day. What's going to happen is the water is only going to go a couple inches into the soil, and that plant is only going to develop its root system in the top couple inches because that's where the water is. So that's fine if you're consistent with watering the top couple inches of soil. But say summer comes and say we have a drought, or say we have triple digits for days on end. That increased heat or increased temperature is going to cause that water in the first couple inches of soil to evaporate very quickly. So that plant might end up showing signs of water stress or heat stress in just a couple hours after you finish watering it. And that's because you've been watering frequently and shallowly. Now, compare that to another plant that you water deeply and infrequently. What that's going to do is that's going to cause the plant to dive deep down, follow the water, and develop its root system deep down in the ground. So then when we have a very hot day, or we have a drought, or you don't make it home after work to water your plant, that plant is going to be able to handle it because it has a very deep layer of soil to protect it from the burning hot sun or evaporation because of the hot temperatures. So how do you water deeply and infrequently? My favorite way to do this is drip irrigation. I think drip irrigation is so incredibly important because of exactly what the name says, it drips. It takes the amount of water that normally you would be pouring on the plant or hosing on the plant, and instead of it spreading kind of all around and some of it getting down into the ground, it very slowly, drip by drip, goes down into the ground. And some people think that their drip irrigation system is not working properly because they only see a small amount of moisture on the surface of the soil. But that actually means that your drip irrigation system is doing exactly what it's meant to do. It's coming out so slowly that it's dripping down into the ground, it's going deep, and it's allowing that plant's roots to follow the water deep down into the ground. So I love doing a drip irrigation system. I love doing slow drip irrigation systems, right? Having a lower gallon per hour emitter if you can. And then I also love allowing for a soak cycle. And so what this means is that you would turn on your drip irrigation and you would water it, and you would allow the water to come down into the soil, and then you would turn it off, or the system would turn it off, and you would allow that soil to soak up all the water. Then you turn it on again in a couple minutes or a couple hours, and then even more water can come down and it can get even deeper. Now, by watering this way, you need to water less frequently, because if you water that way just as frequently as you did before, you would be giving that plant too much water. You want to water infrequently because that's going to force the roots to find that water deep down into the ground. So then this plant, this really strong, robust plant that has really, really deep roots, when it's a drought or when it's 100 degrees out, it's going to be okay because it's used to not getting water that often, and it's used to finding water deep down in the ground. Tip number 3 for watering your garden properly is understanding the timing of your watering. When during the day should you be watering? And the best time to water your plants for most people is between the hours of 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. So why do I say this? That is because the sun is not up, it is still cold, but the sun is coming up soon. So the purpose of watering early in the morning is that it's still going to be cold enough, the sun's not going to be up, and the water's not going to evaporate immediately as soon as you water your plants. So it's going to give the water a chance to come down through the soil and really soak in. But knowing that the sun is going to come up in a couple hours, and whatever water is left over, say you have sprinklers and it kind of gets some water on your leaves, that water is going to dry up. You don't want that water to sit on the leaves of your plants or your plants, because that is a breeding ground for mold, mildew, fungus, all that nasty stuff that we want to avoid. So if we watered at night, if we watered, say, right before we went to bed, there would be water sitting on our plants or sitting around the stems of our plants all night long. The sun goes down, it's cold, and there's just this really moist environment there that can breed fungus or mildew. If we water in the morning, say our drip irrigation system goes off at 5 a.m. like mine does, then I know that my plants are going to be able to absorb all the water that it needs. And then once the sun comes up, whatever moisture is going on is going to dry up, and my plants are going to avoid any mold or mildew during the day. So it's just going to protect the plants, yet still allow the plants to get the water it needs. Next tip for watering your garden properly is understanding water conservation strategies. Now, this is important for conserving water for the environment, of course. Our plants, our gardens, our lawns take a ton of water, and that costs a lot of money. And, we want to conserve as much water as we can, so we're not wasting the amount of water that we're using. But water conservation strategies are also important for the health of our plants. If we don't take these strategies, these plants are going to be relying on us to water it all the time. So if something happens, like a drought, like hot weather, or you go on vacation and whoever's watching your garden forgets to water your plants, the plants that have these water conservation strategies implemented are going to be able to handle those times a lot better than the plants that don't. So what are some water conservation strategies? Well, some of them I've already talked about. Watering deeply and infrequently so that that plant can develop a really good root system. That is really important. That is key. Watering early in the morning so that that plant has plenty of time to absorb all the water it needs before the hot sun or hot temperature evaporates that water also will help conserve water. The third tip for water conservation is mulch, mulch, mulch. Now, mulch, I say mulch, mulch, mulch because it's that important. Mulch is so important not only to maintain the moisture level in the soil, but for many other reasons. It also keeps the temperature of our soil down. That layer of mulch on top of our soil makes sure that that soil doesn't heat up so fast that it evaporates the water so fast and it's almost like you didn't even water your plants in the first place. So making sure that you have a nice thick layer of mulch around your garden to keep the moisture level in is huge. The other thing that you might want to think about, and this broke my heart when I learned it because I love black mulch. Black mulch does heat up more than, say, brown mulch, right? And that is just because it's black. The sun is going to hit it and it's going to heat up and it's going to heat up the soil and it's going to cause more evaporation. I love black mulch. I love the look of black mulch. It's a really tough one for me to say because I know how much I love black mulch. But it's the same thing if you use rocks as mulch. Rocks heat up very fast as well. So if you live in a hot area, that might not be the best type of mulch to use if you are thinking about water conservation strategies. Other ways to conserve water are actually how you water your plant. And that is, like I was talking about, using a drip irrigation system as opposed to sprinklers or overhead watering. That means that the water is going to get to where it needs to go without evaporating or without wasting a bunch of water all over the place. Another way that we can water appropriately is by using Proven Winners aquapots. I love these because it's actually bottom watering your plants and it's allowing your plants to, just like I said, develop their root system nice and deep down into the soil where that container of water is. The plant can soak up all the water that it needs, and it's actually going to save water because the plant is only going to take the amount of water it needs from the aquapot watering system. I really love this system, especially for those of us in hot areas, because it can actually help prevent pots from drying out during the hot days, and it will actually save our plants during times of drought or times of triple-digit temperatures. I know because I tried it in my garden last year and it worked perfectly. So implementing strategies like drip system or like using aqua pots in your pots is really going to help with water conservation and really going to help with watering your garden. Okay, the very last tip I have for watering your garden properly is checking the water that your garden has. And I know this sounds crazy, and of course you would check, but if you have a drip irrigation system, or if you're relying on your spouse to water your plants, you kind of don't know how much water your plants are getting. The best tool that you have to check how much water your plants are getting is your finger. All you have to do is stick your finger into the soil and feel around, and you can feel if that soil is moist, if it has moisture in it, or if it's bone dry. Maybe your spouse didn't know that they were supposed to water that plant. Maybe your drip irrigation system is malfunctioning and it's not working properly. Maybe your drip irrigation system is broken and it's spewing water all over the place on low water or drought tolerant plants, and it's overwatering these plants. My point is that once you set up your watering system, or once you figure out how much you need to water your garden, you're not done. You need to constantly check and see how your watering is going in your garden, especially when we get into the hot days of summer. I got into the habit of just walking around every evening and just kind of looking at my garden and kind of looking at the soil and looking at the leaves, checking to see if I see any signs of water stress or heat stress. And if I do, I would just stick my finger down into that soil and check the soil moisture level. And if you feel like you don't understand what I'm talking about now, if you stick your finger down into the soil, trust me, you'll get it eventually. I was exactly where you were. I would take my houseplants and I would stick my finger into the soil and I would say, I have no idea if this is dry or this is not. And I would get really frustrated because I didn't understand. But the more you stick your finger down into that soil and the more you feel around, the more you're going to understand what moist soil feels like and what dry soil feels like. And so the more you do it, the more comfortable you're going to get. And then when you walk around to your garden and you stick your finger in the soil, you will be able to understand if that plant has moisture or if it is in need of a drink. So tip number 5 for watering your garden properly is checking it often. It is never a job that you can kind of just wash your hands of and be done with. You need to check it often, unfortunately, but it is the truth. Okay, so that is it. I hope you all enjoyed the 5 tips I had for watering your garden properly. Make sure you check out November's video, which was 5 tips for healthy soil, and make sure you subscribe to the Proven Winners newsletter, Winner's Circle. It is incredibly helpful. It has so many tips and so many tips from different gardeners all over different regions of the United States. So I will leave a link below where you can sign up for that, and that is the same place that you can sign up for the Proven Winners Gardener's Idea book to be sent to you. So I hope you all enjoyed this, and I hope you all have a chance to get in your garden today.